A canine German shepherd, once a fearless protector, now shivers in the freezing snow. Her body is weak, and her spirit is fading, but she is not alone. 5 tiny puppies press against her for warmth, their fragile bodies trembling in the bitter cold. She lowers her head, exhausted as the icy wind howls around them. No one has come. No one has heard her silent cries. But just when all hope seems lost, something unbelievable happens. This is a story of survival, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond of a mother's love. You won't believe what this brave German shepherd endured and how her fate changed forever. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. Your support helps us bring you more inspiring stories like this one. The wind howled through the frozen landscape, carrying a bitter chill that cut through bone and fur alike. The snow-covered ground stretched endlessly in every direction, offering no shelter, no warmth, only silence and the unrelenting wind. In the middle of the icy wasteland, a German shepherd lay curled around her 5 tiny puppies, her body acting as their only shield against the freezing temperatures. Her fur, once thick and strong, was now dull and covered in frost. Her once powerful frame trembled from exhaustion and hunger. She had once been a canine protector, a warrior, but now she was just another abandoned soul left to die. She didn't know how long she had been out here, days, hours. Time blurred into an endless struggle to keep her puppies warm. Each shivering breath she took was an effort, and every time she closed her eyes, darkness threatened to pull her under. But she couldn't rest, not yet, not while her puppies needed her. The snow piled higher around them, creeping closer with each gust of wind. She tried to stand, but her legs buckled beneath her weight. Too weak, too cold. She had survived many hardships in her life. Intense training, dangerous missions, long nights on duty, but nothing compared to this. Her mind flickered with memories. The warm barracks, the strong voice of her handler, the praise, the love, the purpose. She had once belonged somewhere. She had once been a hero, but that life had been ripped away. After years of service, she had been deemed too old, too slow. The day they took her collar and badge away, she didn't understand. She watched as younger dogs took her place, eager and strong, while she was let out of the station and dumped like trash. She wandered for days, confused and lost, before finding shelter in an abandoned shed. And then the puppies, her babies. She hadn't planned for them, but when they came, helpless and small, she knew she would die before she let anything happen to them. Now, that moment was coming sooner than expected. A low whimper came from one of the puppies. A tiny, frail thing with a dark coat. He nestled closer, his body barely warm. The mother's heart clenched. She had to move. She had to do something. With every ounce of strength she had left, she lifted her head and let out a weak, broken howl. It wasn't the strong bark of AK-9. It was a plea, a final call for help. But no one was there. Her head lowered again. Maybe this was how it ended. Maybe they were meant to fade into the snow, unnoticed, forgotten. Then footsteps, faint at first, then growing louder. A shadow moved through the swirling snow, slow and hesitant. A human. The mother lifted her head, her ears twitching. Was it her handler? No. The scent was different, unfamiliar. A man stood a few feet away, bundled in a thick coat, his breath visible in the freezing air. His eyes locked onto the sight before him. A shivering German shepherd curled around 5 helpless puppies, half buried in the snow. For a moment, neither moved. The man's eyes softened, his face filled with shock and sorrow. Then he dropped to his knees. "Oh, God!" His voice was barely a whisper. Carried away by the wind, the German shepherd's muscles tensed. Could she trust him? She had trusted humans before. They had trained her, praised her, given her purpose. And yet, they had also abandoned her, left her to die in the cold. She watched the man closely, his every movement. He reached out, slow and careful, as if approaching a wounded animal. "It's okay, girl," he murmured. "I'm not going to hurt you." Her ears flicked. A kind voice, gentle hands. No threat. But the puppies. She curled tighter around them, unsure. The man's gaze dropped to the small bodies pressed against her, barely moving. A shadow of urgency passed over his face. He unzipped his coat and, without hesitation, took off his gloves and jacket. The cold bit at his skin instantly, but he didn't seem to care. He wrapped the jacket around the puppies, his hands moving quickly. His breath was shaky, and he muttered under it, almost as if praying, "You're going to be okay. I've got you." The mother whined, torn between fear and hope. Then something in the man's eyes, determination, compassion, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to believe. The man reached for her again. This time, she didn't move away. She was too weak to fight, too cold to run. But maybe, just maybe, help had finally come, and it had arrived just in time. The man's hands trembled as he wrapped his coat tightly around the puppies. Their tiny bodies barely moved, their fur damp with frost, too cold, too weak. His breath came out in short, visible puffs as he worked quickly, tucking them against his chest for warmth. The mother German shepherd watched with weary, exhausted eyes. She didn't know him. She didn't know if she could trust him, but as she looked at her puppies, so small, so fragile, she knew she had no choice. "I have to get you all out of here," the man murmured, his voice laced with urgency. His name was Ethan Carter, a local wildlife photographer. He had been scouting the snowy woods for winter shots, never expecting to stumble upon a dying mother and her litter. Ethan carefully extended his hand toward the mother, palm up, letting her sniff him. Her black nose twitched, catching the scent of leather, wool, and something warm, human kindness. "It's okay, girl," he assured her. "I won't hurt you." The German shepherd didn't growl. She didn't have the strength, but she didn't pull away either. That was enough for Ethan. "All right," he whispered, adjusting the jacket wrapped around the puppies. They needed warmth, and they needed it fast. His truck was parked a mile away, back near the road. A mile through knee-deep snow, carrying 5 frozen puppies and a nearly unconscious mother. Ethan didn't hesitate. "I'm getting you out of here." He bent down carefully, scooping the mother into his arms. She was heavier than she looked, but she didn't resist. Her head leaned against his chest, her body limp from exhaustion. Ethan tightened his grip. "Hang in there, girl," he whispered. With the mother in one arm and the bundled puppies in the other, he began the hardest walk of his life. The snow fought him every step of the way, thick, heavy, relentless. Ethan gritted his teeth and pushed forward, each step sending shocks of cold through his boots. The wind sliced at his exposed skin, but he refused to stop. The mother barely moved in his arms. Her breaths were slow, too shallow. "Stay with me," Ethan muttered, "just a little longer." The puppies huddled together inside his jacket, their faint whimpers the only sign of life. He held them close, shielding them from the wind. The truck was still far away, too far. Ethan's legs burned, his body screamed for rest, but there was no stopping. Not now. He adjusted his grip, pulling the mother tighter against his chest. That was when he noticed it. Her ears twitched. A small movement, a sign of life. "That's it, girl," he encouraged. "You're a fighter, aren't you? AK-9 never gives up." She had spent her life protecting others. Now, it was her turn to be saved. Ethan stumbled onto the road, his boots skidding against the ice. His truck was just ahead, covered in a layer of frost. Relief surged through him, but he wasn't safe yet. Fumbling with his keys, he yanked the door open and gently placed the mother on the passenger seat. She didn't lift her head. "Hold on," he whispered. He climbed in, cranked the heat up to full blast, and grabbed the puppies from inside his jacket. They were too still, too cold. Ethan placed them against the mother's belly, hoping her body heat would help. Then he pulled off his gloves and rubbed each tiny puppy between his hands, trying to warm them. "Come on, guys. Stay with me." Seconds felt like hours. The car was heating up, but the puppies weren't responding. Panic flared in Ethan's chest. They needed a vet now. Slamming the truck into drive, he hit the gas, tires skidding. He sped toward town. He glanced at the mother. Her eyes were half open, unfocused, but she was watching him. "Don't worry, girl," he promised. "I won't let anything happen to them. I swear." For the first time since he found her, her tail twitched. A small movement, a fragile hope. Ethan gripped the wheel tighter. He wasn't giving up on them. Ethan's truck barreled down the icy road, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. Snow flurries danced across the windshield, but he barely noticed. His only focus was getting to the vet fast. The mother German shepherd lay motionless on the passenger seat, her shallow breasts barely visible in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. She was fading. The puppies huddled against her made no sound. That silence terrified Ethan more than anything. "Stay with me," he muttered, pressing harder on the gas. The truck's tires skidded slightly, but he steadied it. He couldn't afford to lose control, not now. His heart pounded in his chest. He had found them just in time, but was it enough? The town was still miles away, and every passing second felt like an eternity. Ethan reached over carefully, placing a hand on the mother's side. Her fur was cold, too cold. "You're not dying today," he whispered. "Not on my watch." Her ear twitched just slightly. A weak response, but it was something. She was still fighting. Ethan turned up the heat in the truck, then checked the puppies. He pulled his jacket open, adjusting the bundles so they could feel more warmth. No movement, no sound. Damn it! He gritted his teeth and did the only thing he could think of. He started talking. "You know, I wasn't even supposed to be out there today," he said, keeping his voice steady. "I was looking for eagles. That's what I do, wildlife photography." He didn't expect to find her instead. His throat tightened as he glanced at the mother. "I don't know who dumped you, but whoever they are, they don't deserve you." His words filled the empty space of the truck, but the German shepherd didn't react. She was too far gone. Ethan clenched his jaw, forcing back the anger rising inside him. Who abandons a dog like this? A K9 no less? She had been a hero once. She had protected people, given her best years to service. And this was her reward? He shook his head, gripping the wheel tighter. Not today. Not if he had anything to say about it. Finally, the town's lights appeared in the distance. Ethan's heart leaped, just a little further. He reached for his phone and dialed the emergency vet clinic. "Dr. Reeves speaking." A voice answered. "Dr. Reeves, it's Ethan Carter. I found a German shepherd and her 5 puppies in the snow. They're barely breathing. I'm about 5 minutes out. We'll be ready." "Get here fast," she said. Ethan didn't need to be told twice. When he pulled up to the vet clinic, the doors flew open before he could even park. 2 vet techs rushed outside, followed by Dr. Emily Reeves, a woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and a steady presence. Ethan jumped out, grabbing the puppies first. "They're freezing," he said urgently, handing them off to one of the techs. Barely moving, the tech took them, rushing inside without hesitation. Ethan turned back and carefully lifted the mother. She was heavier than before, or maybe his arms were just numb from exhaustion. He cradled her close, her head lolling against his chest, too weak to lift it. "She's the worst off," he told Dr. Reeves. "I don't know how long she's been out there." Dr. Reeves placed a hand on the dog's side, feeling for her breathing. Her expression tightened. "Let's go now." Ethan followed him inside, his boots tracking snow across the clinic floor. The next few minutes were a blur of movement. The mother was placed on a table, wrapped in warming blankets. The puppies were rushed to another station, monitored under heated lamps. Oxygen tubes were placed near their tiny noses. Ethan stood frozen, helpless, watching as professionals worked. "Come on," he muttered. "Fight." Minutes passed. Then a small sound. A whimper. Ethan's head snapped toward the table. The mother's ears twitched. Then, with what looked like the last of her strength, she opened her eyes. Ethan exhaled sharply. Relief crashed over him like a wave. "She's awake," Dr. Reeves confirmed, checking her vitals. "She's weak, but she's fighting." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his pulse still racing. "And the puppies?" he asked, turning toward the other side of the room. The vet tech smiled faintly. "They're warming up. It'll take time, but they're alive." Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. They made it. The mother, as if sensing the change in the room, gave a low, weak whine. Ethan stepped closer. He reached out, hesitating, then gently placed a hand on her head. "You're safe now," he told her. "All of you." Her eyes met his. For the first time, full of exhaustion, but also trust. She believed him. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't alone. The soft hum of medical equipment filled the clinic room, mingling with the rhythmic beeping of the monitor attached to the mother German Shepherd. She was alive, but barely. Ethan sat beside her, his elbows resting on his knees, watching as the vet techs moved efficiently around the room. The puppies were still weak, their tiny bodies nestled under heating lamps. But they were breathing. That was all that mattered for now. Dr. Reeves studied the mother's chart, her brow furrowed in concentration. She's severely malnourished, hypothermic, dehydrated, exhausted, she said. If you hadn't found her when you did... She trailed off, but Ethan knew what she meant. She's a fighter, he murmured, his gaze fixed on the dog's motionless form. A slight twitch of her ear told him she was listening. Dr. Reeves gave a nod. She's been through hell, but I think she's got some fight left in her. Ethan exhaled, relief and exhaustion mixing in his chest. He'd been holding on to hope with both hands, but hearing it from a vet made it feel real. He reached out slowly, placing his palm against the mother's head. Her fur was rough, dry, and cold beneath his touch. "You hear that, girl," he murmured. "You're not done yet." Her amber eyes barely cracked open, but they found him. A weak, sluggish movement, yet intentional. She knew she was safe. For the next several hours, Ethan refused to leave. He stayed by her side as the team worked, watching as they carefully administered 4 fluids and pain medication. The puppies were placed in an incubator, their tiny chests rising and falling in uneven breaths. Every so often, Ethan found himself rubbing his hands together, trying to get rid of the chill in his bones. It wasn't from the snow. It was a memory of how close he had been to losing them all. Dr. Reeves checked on him occasionally, offering coffee, but he barely touched it. His focus stayed on the mother. Then a small movement. She shifted, ever so slightly. Her muscles twitched under the blankets. Ethan sat up straight. Dr. Reeves noticed it too. She leaned in, her voice gentle but firm. "She's trying to move. That's a good sign." The mother let out a low whimper, weak but distinct. "Easy, girl," Ethan soothed, his hand instinctively moving to stroke her ear. The German Shepherd's eyes fluttered fully open, clearer than before. She took a slow, labored breath and turned her head toward the incubator. Ethan swallowed. She was looking for her puppies. He stood and walked to the incubator, carefully lifting one of the tiny pups, the smallest of the litter. He carried the fragile newborn over and gently placed him beside her. The mother let out a soft, shaky breath. She nudged the puppy weakly with her nose. The faintest trace of warmth returned to her tired eyes. "She hasn't given up," Ethan said quietly. Dr. Reeves nodded. "She's not just fighting for herself. She's fighting for them." By the time morning light filtered through the clinic windows, the German Shepherd had improved slightly. Her breathing was stronger, and she was even able to lift her head for a few moments at a time. Ethan had spent the entire night by her side, refusing to leave. He had no idea why this dog had gotten him the way she had. Maybe it was the way she had protected her puppies, even in the worst conditions. Maybe it was the way she hadn't given up, even when she had every reason to. Or maybe, just maybe, it was because she reminded him of himself, alone, forgotten, searching for purpose. Ethan ran a hand over his face. He had always been the type to observe from a distance, never interfere, never get attached. But this dog, she wasn't just another photograph. She was a survivor, and so were her puppies. Dr. Reeves approached with a small, tired smile. "She's stable," she told Ethan, "but she's going to need a place to recover. Somewhere safe." Ethan felt the weight of the words before she even finished speaking. A home. He glanced at the mother, who was watching him now. Truly watching. No fear. No hesitation. Just quiet recognition. Ethan sighed. "I guess I should start thinking of a name, huh?" The mother's tail gave the faintest wag, and for the first time in a long time, Ethan didn't feel alone. Ethan sat in the clinic chair, his elbows resting on his knees, staring at the German Shepherd lying on the vet's examination table. She was awake now, fully aware. Her amber eyes followed his every movement. Her ears twitched slightly when he shifted. She was still weak, but she was fighting. The puppies, now stable, had been placed beside her. Each one burrowed against her belly for warmth. She nosed them gently, reassuring them the way only a mother could. Ethan let out a slow breath. He hadn't planned on this. "All right, girl," he muttered, leaning back in his chair. "I can't keep calling you girl forever. You need a name." The German shepherd tilted her head slightly, as if listening. Ethan tapped his fingers on his knees, thinking, "You're strong, smart, loyal." His eyes flicked to her puppies, then back to her, and you never gave up on them, even when things got bad. A memory flickered in his mind the first time he had seen her, curled in the snow, shielding her puppies from the freezing wind. She had nearly died for them. He rubbed his jaw. "What about Sierra?" The dog blinked. Her ears perked up slightly. "Sierra," he repeated, testing it. "Tough, strong, kind of fits you." The mother huffed softly, shifting against the blanket beneath her. "All right then," Ethan said. "Sierra it is." He glanced at Dr. Reeves, who was watching with a small smile. "She likes it," she remarked. Ethan smirked. "She'd better. It's a good name." Sierra let out a deep, slow exhale. Her eyes finally closed as she relaxed against the warmth of her puppies. For the first time in days, she wasn't fighting to survive. She was safe. For the next few days, Ethan visited the clinic every morning and every evening. He watched as Sierra slowly regained her strength, how she went from barely lifting her head to standing, even if a little shaky at first. Her appetite returned, and soon she was strong enough to lick her puppies clean, nudging them closer whenever they strayed too far. Each visit, Ethan found himself staying longer. At first, he told himself he was just checking in, making sure she was okay. But deep down, he knew better. Sierra wasn't just another rescue. She was different. She had survived the impossible. And yet she still trusted him. One evening, as he sat on the floor beside her, watching the puppies squirm in their bed, Sierra leaned forward and rested her head against his leg. Ethan stiffened. It wasn't much, but it meant something. Slowly, he reached out and scratched behind her ears. Her tail thumped once. Ethan exhaled a slow smile, tugging at his lips. "Yeah," he murmured. "I think you and me, we'll figure this out." By the end of the week, Dr. Reeves cleared Sierra for release. "She'll need continued care," she told Ethan as he signed the final paperwork. "Regular feeding, a warm place to sleep, and checkups every few weeks." Ethan hesitated. "And the puppies?" Dr. Reeves smiled. "They're thriving. Once they're old enough, we'll find them good homes." But the mother, she glanced at Sierra, who sat by Ethan's side, ears up, alert. "She's already found hers," Dr. Reeves said. Ethan looked down at Sierra. She was watching him, waiting, as if she already knew. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Guess I'd better stock up on dog food." Dr. Reeves laughed. "I had a feeling you'd say that." Ethan crouched beside Sierra, resting his arm on his knee. "All right, girl. Ready to go home." Sierra licked his hand. The drive home was quiet, peaceful. Sierra sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window as the snow-covered trees blurred past. She wasn't tense. She wasn't afraid. She was calm. Ethan stole a glance at her. She had been left for dead in the snow, but now she had a home, a second chance. He reached over, giving her head a gentle pat. "Welcome home, Sierra." She didn't look away from the window, but her tail wagged just once, and that was enough. The drive home felt surreal. Just a few days ago, Sierra had been buried in the snow, barely clinging to life. Now, she sat beside Ethan, her ears perked up, watching the world pass by through the truck's window. She was still thin, her fur patchy in places. Her movements were slower than they should be. But her eyes, those sharp, intelligent amber eyes, were alive again. Ethan tapped his fingers against the steering wheel, glancing at her every so often. He had rescued animals before, but this was different. Sierra wasn't just any dog. She was a survivor, a warrior, a mother who had risked everything for her pups. And now, she was his responsibility. When they pulled into Ethan's long driveway, Sierra lifted her head slightly, taking in the new surroundings. The cabin was modest but warm, sitting on a stretch of open land surrounded by thick forest. "This is it," Ethan murmured as he put the truck in park. "Not bad, huh?" Sierra didn't move at first. Ethan reached over, placing a reassuring hand on her back. "Come on, girl. Let's get you inside." Slowly, he opened the door, stepping out into the cold air. Sierra hesitated. She sniffed at the open air, her body tense. Then, with careful movements, she climbed out of the truck. Ethan stayed still, watching her. He wasn't going to rush her. She needed to feel safe. Sierra's paws crunched against the snow-covered ground. She sniffed the air again, ears flicking in different directions. Ethan took a few steps forward, and then, to his surprise, Sierra followed. She stuck close to him, her body language cautious but not fearful. She trusted him, and for a dog that had been abandoned, left to die in the cold, that trust meant everything. Inside, Ethan made sure Sierra had everything she needed. A warm blanket near the fireplace, fresh water, a bowl of high-protein food to help her regain her strength. She approached cautiously, sniffing the bowl before taking her first bite. It was slow at first, hesitant, but after the first few mouthfuls, she ate with more urgency. Ethan leaned against the counter, watching. It had been days since she had eaten a proper meal. The fact that she was eating now meant she was starting to believe she was safe. After finishing, she curled up near the fireplace, her body finally relaxing. Ethan crouched beside her. "You like it here," he murmured. "It's quiet, peaceful." She lifted her head slightly, looking at him. Then, for the first time, she licked his hand, a slow, deliberate movement, not out of desperation, not out of hunger. It was trust. Ethan exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "Yeah," he muttered. "You and me, Sierra, we're going to be just fine." That night, Ethan kept his bedroom door open just in case Sierra got restless. But she didn't. Instead, she slept deeply by the fireplace, curled up on the thick blanket he had given her. She barely stirred. She wasn't shivering. She wasn't on edge. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, Sierra slept peacefully. Over the next few days, she started to settle in. At first, she moved cautiously, still unsure of her surroundings. But soon, she became more comfortable. She followed Ethan when he moved around the house, keeping him in sight. She explored the backyard, her nose twitching as she took in the unfamiliar scents. She even wagged her tail when he brought her a new toy. Ethan found himself watching her more than he cared to admit. She wasn't just a rescue. She was family now. And deep down, he knew that Sierra was watching him too, learning to trust again, one day at a time. One evening, Ethan sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. Sierra sat beside him, her body relaxed, her head resting against his knee. For a long time, neither of them moved. Finally, Ethan sighed. "You ever wonder why things happen the way they do?" Sierra didn't answer, of course, but she didn't move away either. "Guess it doesn't matter," Ethan murmured, scratching her behind the ears. "We're here now. That's what counts." She huffed softly in response, and as the last light of day faded into night, Ethan realized something. He hadn't just saved Sierra. She had saved him too.